All right, welcome back, everyone. Today we are diving deep into a story that's been making headlines in Nigeria.
Oh, yeah, this one's a doozy.
Yeah, it's a big one. About the Central Bank of Nigeria.
To CBN?
That's right, the CBN. And they're facing some serious legal trouble after a wave of layoffs.
Yeah, a lot of people lost their jobs, and it's gotten messy.
It has. We've got articles from Premium Times, Punch newspapers, and The Cable, all covering this.
So we've got a lot to unpack here.
We do. So are you ready to get into it?
Absolutely. Let's dive in.
Okay, so back in 2024, the CBN laid off about 1,000 employees.
Yeah, that's a lot of people.
It is a lot of people. And it all happened in 4 separate rounds of layoffs between March and May.
So they kind of drew it out?
Yeah, they did. It wasn't all at
Yeah.
once. And the bank said it was because of reorganization and human capital restructuring.
But those words, they can be kind of vague, right?
They can be. And actually, the employees who are let go are telling a very different story.
See, that's what makes this so interesting.
Yeah. Some former employees are saying that they received really small severance packages.
Like, how small are we talking?
Some are saying they got as low as N5,000.
Wow, that's almost nothing.
Yeah, it's incredibly low.
Yeah.
And then others are alleging that their entire gratuities, the money they earned over years of service.
Right, the retirement funds, basically.
Exactly. They're saying those were used to pay off any outstanding loans they had with the bank.
So not only did they lose their jobs, they're potentially even deeper in debt now.
Yeah, that's what some of them are claiming. And, these aren't just numbers on a balance sheet.
These are people's lives.
Exactly. Real people with families and bills to pay.
Absolutely. Do we have any sense of how the employees are feeling about all of this?
Yeah, I mean, you can imagine how devastating this must be.
I bet.
One former employee said, 15 years of loyalty and hard work, and all I got was N5,000.
Oof, that's tough to hear.
Yeah. And another one shared, by the time they deducted my gratuity, I still owed the bank over N30 million.
30 million. How are you supposed to recover from that?
Exactly, that's the question. How does anyone survive this?
It really puts a human face on this whole situation.
It does. And that feeling of betrayal, I think that's what pushed these former employees to take legal action.
They filed a lawsuit?
Yep, a class action lawsuit.
Wow, they're not messing around.
Nope. This group is being led by someone named Stephen Ghana, and they filed their suit against the CBN at the National Industrial Court of Nigeria in Abuja.
Okay, so they went straight to the top.
It did. And they're seeking a lot of money in damages, like N30 bn.
That's a huge amount.
It is. And that's just for the psychological distress, the hardship, and the damage to their reputation.
I guess they're trying to send a message.
Yeah, it seems that way. Plus, on top of that, they're asking for another N500 million to cover the cost of the lawsuit itself.
So they're really going all in.
They are. And their argument is really interesting.
What are they basing their case on?
Well, they're claiming that the CBN violated their constitutional right to a fair hearing.
So they're saying their rights were violated.
Yeah, that's their argument. Specifically, they're saying the CBN didn't follow Section 36 of the Nigerian Constitution, which guarantees everyone a fair hearing.
So they feel like they weren't given a chance to defend themselves.
Right. They're saying they weren't given a proper opportunity to make their case before being let go.
I see. So they're taking a constitutional approach. Anything else?
They're also saying the CBN went against its own internal rules.
You mean like their employee handbook or something?
Yeah, exactly. Specifically, they're pointing to the Human Resources Policies and Procedures Manual, or HRPPM.
Okay, so what did the CBN supposedly ignore in that manual?
Well, they're claiming the CBN violated Article 16.4.1, which says that the bank has to consult with something called the Joint Consultative Council before taking any actions that could negatively affect staff.
So like a union or employee representative group?
Yeah, something like that. So the employees are saying this consultation never happened.
Interesting. So they're saying the CBN didn't follow its own rules and didn't even give employees a chance to voice their concerns.
And to make things even more complicated, they're bringing up the CBN Act itself, the law that governs the entire bank.
Okay, so now they're bringing in the big guns.
They are. They're claiming that this act requires board approval for big employment decisions like mass layoffs. And they're saying that this approval just didn't happen.
So they're suggesting there might have been some procedural irregularities.
Right. And they're basically asking, did the CBN overstep its authority?
This is getting complicated. So what's the CBN's response to all of this?
Well, of course, they're not just sitting back and accepting these accusations.
What are they saying?
They're fighting back, saying they did everything by the book.
So they're denying any wrongdoing.
Yep. They're saying they followed the terms of the employees' contracts and that they paid everyone 3 months' salary in lieu of notice, just like the contract said.
Okay, so they're sticking to their guns.
They are. They're insisting that this restructuring was absolutely necessary and that it had nothing to do with any misconduct on the employee's part.
It's really a he said, she said situation right now.
It is two very different stories.
So how does the court even begin to untangle this?
Well, back on November 20th, 2024, the court actually encouraged both parties to try and find a peaceful resolution.
They tried to get them to settle?
Yeah, they basically said, hey, maybe you guys can work this out. And they even adjourned the case until January 29th, 2025 to give them time to talk.
Makes sense. These things can get really messy in court.
Yeah, it could drag on forever.
Yeah.
But then just a few days ago, on January 3rd, 2025, the CBN governor, Olemi Cardoso, made a public statement.
What did he say?
He claimed that those employees actually left voluntarily through an early exit program.
Voluntarily? Really?
That's what he said. And he also emphasized how important this restructuring was for improving the bank's efficiency.
That's quite a different spin on things.
It is. His statement left a lot of people scratching their heads.
I bet. So now we have to ask, was it truly voluntary?
Right. And how does that square with all the allegations of unfair dismissals and those incredibly low severance payments?
This is definitely a case to watch closely.
Absolutely. All right, so now that we've laid out the basics, let's take a closer look at those layoff notices and see what they can tell us.
I'm all ears.
These notices, they're kind of the heart of the matter.
I bet they are.
They went out in 4 separate batches, remember? And it seems like each batch tells its own little story.
Oh, really? Tell me more.
Okay, so the first batch, that went out on March 15th, 2024. Those letters were really vague. They just said, your services are no longer required.
No explanation.
No mention of severance pay, nothing.
Wow, can you imagine getting that letter?
Talk about a shock.
Total uncertainty.
Exactly. And to make matters worse, sources are saying that employees with 6 to 10 years of service, they were told verbally that their gratuities would be used to cover any outstanding loans they had with the bank.
Even if those loans weren't due yet.
Apparently, yeah. And one former employee who wanted to remain anonymous shared a pretty heartbreaking story.
What happened?
They said, after dedicating almost a decade of my life to this bank, they left me with nothing but a mountain of debt. By the time they were done deducting from my gratuity, I still owed the bank over N30 million.
That's devastating.
It really is. Imagine working for almost 10 years and ending up deeper in debt than when you started.
That just doesn't seem right.
It doesn't. And the notices that went out in the next batches, on March 22nd, May 24th, and April 5th, they did mention that employees would get their final entitlements.
So they acknowledged that people were owed something?
Yeah, but they were still really vague. They didn't say anything specific about severance packages or when those payments would be made or anything about benefits.
So still a lot of unknowns.
A lot of questions left unanswered. And then, of course, there are the allegations about those shockingly low severance payments.
Yeah, what's the story there?
Employees with 10 to 20 years of service are saying they got as little as N5,000 to N6,000.
Seriously, after that long?
That's what they're saying. I mean, one person said 15 years of dedicated service, and all they could give me was N5,000. That's not just a betrayal, it's an utter disgrace.
It does make you question their motives.
It does. Now, the CBN has tried to justify these deductions by saying they have a policy of using gratuities to clear any outstanding loan balances.
Including things like staff cooperative loans.
Yeah, those too. But it still doesn't explain those super low payments.
Yeah.
Especially for people who worked there for so long.
It doesn't seem to add up.
Exactly. Something's not quite right. And the employees, they're arguing that this policy was applied unfairly and without their consent.
So they're saying they weren't given a choice.
That's what they're saying. One person said, they stripped us of everything, our gratuities, allowances, even our dignity. Whatever was left after their deductions barely covered a week's worth of expenses.
That's awful. It really shows the power imbalance in these situations.
It does, between a huge institution like the CBN and individual employees.
It makes you wonder if they really had the employees' best interests in mind.
That's a good question. All right, so we've heard from the employees. Now let's see what the CBN has to say in their official response to the lawsuit.
Okay, time for the CBN side of the story.
They filed what's called a preliminary statement of objection, and it basically lays out their defense.
So they're sticking to their guns.
They are. They're maintaining their stance.
What's their main argument?
They're saying they didn't do anything wrong, that they follow the rules, and that the lawsuit has no merit.
So a full denial.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
They're saying they have documents to back up their claims, things like board resolutions and termination notices.
So they're confident they can prove their case.
It seems that way. They're also saying that the National Industrial Court doesn't even have the authority to hear this case.
Trying to get it thrown out.
Yeah, it looks like it.
Yeah.
We did reach out to the CBN for a comment about all the specific allegations the employees are making, but we haven't heard back yet.
It'll be interesting to see what they say, if anything.
Definitely. Yeah. And this isn't the first time the CBN has been in the spotlight for their employment practices.
Oh, really? What happened before?
Last year, the House of Representatives actually told the CBN to stop a planned retirement of 1,000 staff members.
Because they stepped in.
They did. And they even put together a committee to investigate the whole process.
So there's a history here.
There is. And this current case, it's bringing all those past concerns back to the surface.
So this case is really uncovering some deep-rooted issues.
It is. It raises all kinds of questions like, what are the limits of institutional power? How do we balance the needs of large organizations with the rights of their employees? And how do we ensure that things like layoffs are done fairly and transparently?
Those are some big questions.
They are. In this case, it's forcing us to confront those questions head on.
It's definitely making people think.
It is. And as you, our listeners, think about this case, I want you to consider this. If a powerful institution like the CBN can get caught up in this kind of controversy, what does it say about worker rights and job security in Nigeria today?
That's a really good question to ponder.
It is. And it's a question that we'll be exploring further as we continue our deep dive into this story.
I'm ready for more.
Great. Because next, we'll be getting into the potential legal arguments, exploring what could happen, and discussing the wider impact this case might have.
Sounds good to me. Let's keep digging. It is a complicated situation, you know. Institutions like the CBN, they need to be able to adapt.
Right. The economy changes, they have to change too.
Exactly. And sometimes that means restructuring. Sometimes it means layoffs.
I get that, but it's hard not to feel like something's off here.
What do you mean?
Well, we can't forget about the human cost of these decisions.
Of course not. These are real people losing their jobs.
People with families, lives, they had plans for the future.
Absolutely. And that's why these specific allegations, they really need to be examined carefully.
You're right. Were the proper procedures followed? Were these employees treated fairly?
Yeah. Were they given enough notice, enough support? Those are questions the court will have to answer.
And even beyond the legal stuff, there are bigger questions here about ethics, about how corporations treat their workers.
Especially during times of economic change.
Exactly. It's not always easy, but employees deserve better than this.
I agree. But you have to remember, the CBN, they're not just any company.
Right. They're the central bank. They control the money.
Exactly. They set monetary policy. They're responsible for financial stability for the whole Nigerian economy.
So what they do has a big impact.
Huge impact. So when something like this happens, it shakes things up.
It makes people nervous.
Yeah, people start to worry, is the CBN really looking out for everyone?
Or are they just protecting themselves?
That's the question a lot of people are asking.
And remember how they're accused of ignoring that part of the CBN Act about board approval for big decisions?
Yeah, for things like these layoffs.
Right, and the former employees are saying the board was never consulted.
So maybe someone within the CBN was acting on their own?
It's possible, right? Or was it more calculated?
We need more information to know for sure.
We do. But either way, it's a big deal.
It is, and the court, they've been encouraging both sides to settle.
Yeah, try to find a peaceful solution.
It makes sense, but it's not always easy.
Why not?
Well, in a case like this, the stakes are so high.
I can imagine.
For the employees, it's about justice, about holding the CBN accountable, about getting the financial security they need.
And for the CBN, it's about protecting their image, their authority.
Exactly. And they want to be able to move forward with their restructuring plans.
So there's a lot on the line for everyone.
There is. And one thing that really strikes me about this whole situation is the sheer number of people affected.
1,000 employees. That's a lot of lives disrupted.
It is. And those job losses, they don't just affect the individuals, they affect their families, their communities.
It's like a ripple effect.
Exactly. Each one of those 1,000 employees, they have people who depend on them.
Their families, kids in school, maybe they were supporting their parents.
Right, and suddenly that support is gone.
It really shows how interconnected everything is.
It does, and it highlights the need for those safety nets, you know, for support systems when people lose their jobs.
Especially during tough economic times.
Exactly.
So let's dig a little deeper into the legal stuff.
Okay, sounds good.
One of the main things the employees are claiming is that their termination letters, they were not only arbitrary, but actually illegal and unconstitutional.
That's a pretty bold claim.
It is. What are they basing that on?
Well, they're saying the CBN acted without a good reason. that they were dismissed unfairly.
Okay, and is there anything in Nigerian law to back that up?
There is. They're citing Section 36 of the Nigerian Constitution, the part about everyone having the right to a fair hearing.
Which they're saying they didn't get.
Right. They weren't given a chance to defend themselves, to challenge the decision.
So no due process.
Exactly. And they're also bringing up the CBN's internal policies, like that HRPPM we talked about.
The one they're accused of ignoring.
Right. They're saying the CBN didn't follow his own rules, which means the dismissals weren't valid.
It sounds like they've got a strong case.
They might, but the CBN is pushing back pretty hard.
Of course they are.
They're saying they did follow the proper procedures, that the terminations were lawful.
And that it was all part of this restructuring.
Exactly. Not because anyone did anything wrong.
And they're pointing to the fact that they paid everyone 3 months' salary.
Like the contract said.
Right. So they're saying, see, we did everything right.
Exactly. But the employees are arguing that just because they got paid, it doesn't mean the CBN didn't have to follow the rules.
So it's a legal battle, and it's not clear who will win.
It's going to be interesting to watch. But regardless of what happens in court, this whole thing has already had a big impact.
On how people view the CBN.
Yeah, and on the whole debate about worker rights in Nigeria.
It's definitely raised awareness.
It has. And speaking of awareness, remember that statement from the CBN governor?
Oluyemi Cardoso, the one where he said the employees left voluntarily?
Yeah, that one. He didn't really address the specific allegations in the lawsuit.
Like the low severance payments, the lack of due process.
Right, and he didn't explain how this early exit program worked.
It seemed like he was trying to downplay the whole thing.
Maybe. Or shift the blame away from the CBN.
It's hard to say for sure. But there's another part of this story that I think is really important.
What's that?
It's the allegations about how the CBN calculated the severance packages.
What are people saying?
They're claiming the CBN used this really complicated system of deductions and offsets to basically give employees less money.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. Some employees are saying their gratuities, the money they were supposed to get after years of service, was used to pay off loans they had with the bank, even if those loans weren't due yet.
So they're basically taking money that was already earned.
That's what they're saying. And some even claim their severance payments were reduced because of supposed overpayments of allowances or benefits from years ago.
So the CBN is saying, we paid you too much before, so now we're taking it back.
Yeah, something like that. It makes you wonder if they were acting in good faith.
It does raise questions about how they treated their employees.
And whether they used their power to pressure people into accepting less money.
It's a sensitive issue.
It is. Now, the CBN, of course, they say they followed all the rules and regulations.
Sticking to their story.
Yep. But the employees are demanding a full accounting of how those severance packages were calculated.
They want to see the math.
Exactly. And this whole dispute over the severance payments, it's just one piece of this bigger puzzle.
About the CBN's restructuring and how it affected their employees.
Right. But it's a really important piece.
Because it speaks to the core issue of how organizations treat their workers.
Especially when things are changing.
Right, when there's uncertainty and upheaval.
And this case also brings up the issue of transparency and accountability, especially when you're dealing with public funds.
Exactly. These are important questions for any organization, but especially for a central bank.
So let's zoom out a bit and think about the bigger picture.
The Nigerian economy as a whole.
Yeah. The CBN, they play a huge role in shaping economic policy, making sure the financial system is stable.
They're kind of the backbone of the economy.
Exactly. So what happens when there's controversy and uncertainty surrounding an institution like that?
It can have ripple effects.
Like what?
Well, investors might get nervous. They might think twice about investing in Nigeria if they think the CBN is unstable.
So it could hurt the economy.
It could. And businesses might put off their plans. They might not want to expand if they're not sure what the CBN is going to do.
I see. So this uncertainty can make everyone hesitant.
Right. And then consumers, they might lose confidence too.
They might stop spending money.
Exactly, which could slow down the whole economy.
So this case, it's not just about the 1,000 people who lost their jobs.
It's about millions of Nigerians who depend on a healthy economy.
It's about trust in the system.
It is. And it raises the question of whether there should be more oversight.
To make sure institutions like the CBN are operating transparently.
Exactly. And that they're being held accountable for their actions.
That's a really important point. In this case, it's also sparking debate about the role of the CBN in Nigerian society.
Some people think they have too much power.
They've overstepped their boundaries.
Yeah, some say they're interfering in areas that aren't their responsibility, like agriculture or the foreign exchange market.
They think the CBN should stick to basics, like controlling inflation.
Right. But there are others who defend the CBN's actions.
They think it's necessary for them to have a wider role.
Exactly. They say the Nigerian economy faces unique challenges, and the CBN needs to be involved in solving them.
So it's a matter of opinion.
It is. And this debate is probably going to continue, especially with the economy being uncertain and with the political changes happening.
So this case could have a big impact on that debate.
Definitely. If the court sides with the employees, it could make people more critical of the CBN.
They might demand more scrutiny of how the bank operates.
Exactly. But if the court sides with the CBN, it could give them more power, more freedom to do things their way.
So it's a big deal either way.
It is. And regardless of the outcome, this case reminds us that institutions like the CBN, they're not above the law.
They have to answer for their actions.
Exactly. And we can't forget about the human side of all this.
We've talked a lot about the law, the economy.
But what about the people who lost their jobs?
How are they doing?
A lot of them are struggling, having a hard time finding new work.
They're facing financial hardship, emotional stress.
Exactly. Some have had to sell their homes, their cars, just to get by.
It's heartbreaking.
It is. And they feel betrayed, like their years of service meant nothing.
Like they were disposable.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Even within a big, powerful institution like the CBN, individual stories matter.
Every person has their own experience.
Their own struggles, their own hopes and dreams.
In this case, it's a reminder that those stories deserve to be heard.
And that people's rights need to be protected.
It's about finding that balance between economic growth and basic human dignity.
Exactly. So what lessons can we learn from all this? What do you think? Well, I think this case shows how important transparency is.
For all organizations, but especially for powerful ones like the CBN.
Exactly. When decisions are made in secret, it creates mistrust.
And it can lead to abuses of power.
Right. And it's also about fairness, about due process.
Making sure employees know why they're being let go, that they have a chance to defend themselves.
And that they get fair compensation.
It seems like common sense, but it doesn't always happen.
Unfortunately not. And employers, they need to treat their workers with respect.
Even in difficult situations.
Absolutely. And I think this case also shows that the laws protecting workers in Nigeria, they could be stronger.
So it's harder for employees to fight back.
Yeah, a lot of people just don't have the resources to go to court.
It can be expensive and complicated.
It can. And one last thing I think we can learn from this case.
What's that?
It's that economic decisions, they always have human consequences.
We can't forget about the people involved.
Exactly. When we talk about restructuring, efficiency, downsizing, we're not just talking about numbers.
We're talking about people's lives.
Exactly. And those lives should never be an afterthought.
So now we have to think about the future.
This case is still ongoing. We don't know what's going to happen.
But it's already had a big impact.
On the CBN, on the Nigerian economy, on the employees themselves.
It's a story that has made people think about power, about accountability, about the role of institutions in society.
And those conversations are important.
They are.
Yeah.
Now let's explore some of the ways this case could play out.
What are the possible scenarios?
Well, one possibility is that the court rules in favor of the employees.
They find that the CBN violated their rights, that the dismissals were unlawful.
What would happen then?
The CBN could be ordered to give them their jobs back, pay back wages, compensate them for any damages.
So it would be a big win for the employees.
It would, and it would send a message to other employers.
That they can't just fire people without a good reason.
Exactly. But there's also a chance the court could rule in favor of the CBN.
They say the bank did everything right.
Right. And if that happens, the employees would have very few options left.
Like, what could they do?
They could appeal the decision, but that's expensive, takes a lot of time, and there's no guarantee they'd win.
So it's a risk.
It is. And if the CBN wins, it strengthens their position. They can move forward with their plans.
It could also make it harder for other employees to challenge unfair dismissals in the future.
That's true. But there's also a third possibility.
What's that?
They could settle out of court.
Like reach a compromise?
Exactly. The court has encouraged them to do that.
And it would avoid a long, drawn-out legal battle.
Exactly. What do you think a settlement might look like?
Maybe the CBN would offer some compensation to the employees.
Or agree to rehire some of them.
And maybe they'd promise to change their policies, make sure future layoffs are handled more fairly.
It's possible. But it's important to remember that a settlement doesn't always mean justice is served.
What do you mean?
Well, if the CBN settles without admitting they did anything wrong, they might just do the same thing again in the future.
So it wouldn't really change anything.
Right. And the employees, they might feel pressured to accept a settlement that's not really fair to them.
So a settlement isn't always perfect?
It's not, but it's often seen as the best solution in these kinds of cases.
So this case, it really touches on some big themes, bigger than just the CBN and the employees.
What do you see as the bigger issues?
Well, it's about the power dynamics in Nigerian society between institutions and individuals,
Exactly. And about transparency, about holding those in power accountable.
making sure everyone's rights are protected.
It is. And it's also about the challenges of economic development, balancing growth with social justice.
It's a tough balance to strike.
It is. And ultimately, this case shows us that justice isn't always easy.
It can be a long and difficult fight.
It can. But it's important for people to stand up for their rights, to hold those in power accountable.
Even when it seems impossible.
Exactly. Now, let's shift our focus back to the human side of
And
things.
people whose lives were turned upside down by these layoffs.
Yeah, we can't forget about them.
We've talked about institutions, about laws, but what about their experiences?
Their stories are important. These layoffs, they've had a devastating impact.
People struggling to find new jobs, facing financial hardship, emotional distress.
Exactly. They've had to make huge sacrifices, sell their belongings, rely on others for help.
Losing a job is never easy. But the way these layoffs were handled, it just makes it worse.
They feel betrayed, like their years of service meant nothing.
Like they were just cogs in a machine.
And that's the thing. Even in a big institution like the CBN, every person has their own story,
Their own unique experience.
their own hopes and dreams, and those stories matter.
They do. So what can we learn from all of this?
Well, I think it highlights the need for transparency and accountability.
Especially for powerful institutions.
Exactly. Decisions shouldn't be made in secret. There needs to be input from everyone involved.
And fairness is crucial, making sure employees are treated with respect, that they have due process.
Absolutely. And I think we also need to look at strengthening the laws, protecting workers in Nigeria.
Making it easier for them to fight back against unfair treatment.
Exactly. And most importantly, we need to remember that economic decisions have human consequences.
We can't just focus on the numbers, we have to think about the people.
Exactly. Their lives, their livelihoods, their families.
Those things should always be our top priority.
I agree. So where do we go from here?
What happens next?
Well, this case is still unfolding. We don't know the final outcome.
But it's already sparked important conversations.
About power, about accountability, about the role of institutions in our society.
And those conversations, they need to continue.
They do. Now, let's consider some of the possible scenarios for how this case might end.
What could happen?
Well, one possibility is that the court rules in favor of the former employees.
They say the CBN acted illegally.
Right. And if that happens, the CBN could be ordered to reinstate them, pay back wages, and compensate them for any damages.
So it would be a victory for the workers.
It would, and it would send a strong message to other employers.
That they can't just dismiss people without a good reason.
Exactly. But there's also the possibility that the court could side with the CBN.
They say the bank did everything by the book.
Right. And if that happens, the former employees would be left with very few options.
What could they do?
They could appeal the ruling, but that's costly and time-consuming.
And no guarantee of success.
Exactly. And a ruling in favor of the CBN could set a precedent, making it harder for other employees to challenge unfair dismissals in the future.
So the stakes are high.
They are. There's also a third possibility, of course.
What's that?
The two sides could settle out of court.
They come to an agreement.
Exactly. And the court has been encouraging them to explore that option.
So it's definitely on the table.
It is. And a settlement could involve the CBN offering some kind of compensation to the former employees.
Or even agreeing to rehire some of them.
Possibly. They might also agree to make changes to their policies to prevent something like this from happening again.
So everyone would get something out of it.
In theory, yes. But it's important to be cautious about settlements.
Why is that?
Well, sometimes they can be used to sweep things under the rug.
The CBN could avoid admitting any wrongdoing.
Exactly. And the employees, they might feel pressured to accept a deal that's not in their best interest.
Just to get it over with.
Right. So while a settlement might seem like the best outcome, it's not always that simple.
It's important to make sure it's fair to everyone involved.
Exactly. Now, let's step back and think about the broader implications of this case.
For Nigerian society as a whole.
Yes, this case really raises some fundamental questions about power and accountability.
How institutions use their power. How they're held responsible for their actions.
Exactly. And it also highlights the challenges of economic development.
Balancing the need for growth with the need for social justice.
Right. How do we create a system that works for everyone?
It's a complex question with no easy answers.
It is. But this case forces us to confront that question head on.
And to think about the values that should guide our decisions.
Absolutely. Now let's shift gears and focus on the human side of this story.
The individual stories of those who were affected.
Right, the people behind the headlines.
We've talked about the legal and economic aspects, but what about the personal impact?
The emotional toll, the financial struggles, the feeling of betrayal.
These are real people whose lives were turned upside down.
They are. And their stories deserve to be heard.
Absolutely. It's easy to get caught up in the abstract concepts, but we can't forget about the individuals at the heart of this case.
Their experiences are a powerful reminder of why this matters.
Why fairness, transparency, and accountability are so important.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to ask you a question.
What's that?
What have you learned from this journey?
Has this story changed your perspective on anything?
We've explored the legal arguments, the potential outcomes, the human cost.
We've talked about power, about justice, about the role of institutions in society.
It's been a lot to take in.
It has. But I hope it's helped you make sense of this complex situation.
And maybe even inspired you to think more deeply about these issues.
Because they affect all of us.
They do. Now, the story's still unfolding. There's more to come.
But for now, we want to hear from you.
What are your thoughts?
What resonated with you the most?
Join us in part 3 as we open up the discussion and explore your perspectives.
We want to know what you think. All right, welcome back to our deep dive into the CBN layoffs and the lawsuit that followed. We've covered a lot of ground, from the legal arguments to the economic implications and, of course, the human cost of it all. Now, in this final part, it's your turn, our listeners. What are your thoughts? What stood out to you the most in this whole story?
You know, for me, this situation really brings to light the importance of a strong and independent judiciary in Nigeria. It's in times like these, when you have this kind of David and Goliath scenario, that you realize how crucial it is to have a legal system that can hold powerful institutions accountable.
That's such a good point. I mean, if the CBN weren't facing a real legal challenge, would we even be having this conversation?
It's a good question. It's possible that the injustices these CBN employees are alleging, they might have just gone unnoticed without a fair and impartial legal system to turn to. The fact that they have the ability to bring their case before the courts, that says a lot about the potential strength of Nigeria's judicial system.
It really does.
Well,
It speaks to the idea that everyone has a right to seek justice, no matter who they are or who they're up against.
exactly. That's a fundamental principle of a just and equitable society.
Absolutely. And let's not forget the role of the media in all of this.
Yeah.
The reporting from outlets like Premium Times, Punch newspapers, the cable, that's what brought this story to light.
Right, without investigative journalism, this whole thing might have stayed hidden. A free and independent press is so important, especially when you're dealing with powerful institutions that might not be completely transparent.
They act as a watchdog, holding those in power accountable and giving a voice to those who might not otherwise be heard.
Exactly. And shining a light on these injustices, that's what can spark real change. Get people talking, get people demanding better.
Right.
And this case has definitely started a lot of conversations in Nigeria.
It has. We're talking about economic inequality, worker rights, the influence of powerful institutions.
These are important conversations to be having. It shows that people are engaged, they care about these issues, and they want to see a more just system.
And hopefully, whatever the outcome of this case, it can serve as a catalyst for positive change. Maybe stronger protections for workers, more transparency within the CBN, even a reevaluation of economic policies that might be contributing to inequality.
It's about more than just this one case. It's about the bigger picture.
Absolutely. And as much as we focus on the legal arguments, the economics, the potential outcomes, we can't lose sight of the human element here.
The people at the heart of it all.
Their stories are what make this so impactful. The financial struggles they're facing, the emotional toll, the feeling of betrayal. These are real experiences, and they matter.
They do. And this deep dive, it's taken us on quite a journey, hasn't it?
It has. From those initial layoffs and the lawsuit, all the way to these bigger conversations about economic justice, institutional power, the role of the judiciary, the media.
It's been a lot to unpack.
It has. But I hope it's given you, our listeners, a better understanding of what's at stake here. This story isn't over, and we'll keep you updated as things develop. But in the meantime, keep thinking about these issues, keep talking about them, and keep demanding better. Your voice matters, your insights are valuable, and together we can work towards a more just and equitable world.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, stay informed, and keep those questions coming.
And that's a wrap on this deep dive into the CBN layoffs and the legal battle that's followed. We've covered a lot of ground, explored different perspectives, and hopefully sparked some important conversations along the way. Thanks for listening, and until next time, remember, stay engaged, stay informed, and keep asking those tough questions.